Thank you for being here. I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. We're anxious for what the Lord wants to do. A little bothered actually tonight about this passage. I was going to, a little confession here, I was going to deal, the purpose of the service tonight was to deal with verse 20, chapter 12, verse 20, and which is the last two of the four negative statements that really are positive statements. And in trying to work my way through that and saturate in that aspect, ended up going in another direction. So we're going to reserve that for another time. And I'm not sure this other direction is proper or good. I think it is. One reason why I think it is because it bothered me a lot. And I'm not particularly thrilled about this sermon at all. And that usually is because I'm under too much conviction. But there it is. It is what it is. So trust that the Lord will speak to us and help me in the midst of this in my own life. So let's bow for prayer. We love you tonight, Jesus. You're just way too good to us. The meal we've had together, the fellowship, just being together, and the blessing of life, and the opportunity you've given us. And Lord, we don't feel adequate. We don't feel like we measure up. And we're just so grateful that this is not a doing thing, because if it was, we would know that under the law we'd all be condemned. So we come bowing in your grace and your love and saying we want you to burn in our bones. We want you to capture our mind. We want you to literally live through our system. We want you to become the center of every individual's life who is here in this place. Oh God, how burdened we are and how we crave tonight that we would be a people who would literally have one focus and one drive in our life, and one thing we proclaim, and one thing that moves us, and one thing that we're passionate about, and one thing that we cry over. That we would have your mind and we would have your heart, and we would be literally a people who would think like you think and care about what you care about. And you would be the drive. What drives you would drive us, because we've become one with you. Capture us with that tonight. We pray thee. In the name of Jesus I ask it. Amen. Chapter 12, as I was getting again into chapter 12, the whole layout of chapter 12 is a contrast. And we've talked a lot about that. It's just, I'm not sure whether Matthew intended, I think he intended the contrast, no question about that. But it's a distinct contrast between two groups or two individuals, the Pharisee on the one hand and Jesus on the other hand. And you see it in every one of the stories. You see it in the prophecy being laid out for us. You see it in the stories that are in the chapter that we've not even dealt with. And the whole chapter just focuses on this Pharisee idea, who the Pharisees are, what they're all about, the direction they're going in, contrasted with the person of Jesus and what he's all about. But one aspect that I wanted to get into tonight, and I'm not sure, again, whether Matthew specifically was trying to talk about this, but it certainly is involved in all that's going on in the contrast. And that is, there's a contrast in ministries. There's the ministry that's spilling through, and you realize both Pharisees and Jesus are involved in ministry. The Pharisees, of course, are in charge of the religious activities of their day. They're down at the temple. They're a part of the group that is the Sadducees, and in addition, and also the scribes. And they handle the whole political as well as the religious tone of their day. And they're involved in the ministry of their hour. And Jesus obviously is involved in ministry. So when you come down, it isn't just the person of the Pharisee, and it isn't just the person of Jesus. It is that. But both groups, both individuals are involved in this phenomenal ministry, and they both are ministering. And when you look at the ministry of the Pharisee and you look at the ministry of Jesus, obviously there's an entire different approach in the ministries. There's an entire different attitude. There's an entire different way of looking at things. There's an entire different way of what we want to get done. The goals are different. Everything about the ministries that are being presented in these two groups or these two individuals is extremely contrasted and radically different. And it seems in the passage that every individual is somehow being drawn into the one of those ministries or the other. And I tried to find if there was a third ministry going on. That would be good if you could have a third choice or a fourth choice, but I didn't find any. That's just these two. And so I don't know where to go with that. Guess I won't go anywhere. But in chapter 12, the stories give you this. For instance, there's the ministry of Jesus and the Pharisees presented in the very first story. And we've dealt with that story. It's verse 1 down through verse 8. And of course, it's all about the grain field, and the disciples are hungry, and Jesus is ministering to them by bringing them down through the grain field so that they can pick grain and eat and satisfy their need and satisfy the basic drive of what they need in their lives at this point. So he's into meeting needs. And the Pharisees, they're all wrapped up in what is lawful in verse 2. They're looking at the disciples saying, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. See, they never ask the question, is it kind? And we talked about this last week, but they never ask the question, is it kind? They always ask the question, is it lawful? See, they're not into, is it loving? Does it meet needs? Does it spill out? They're always, well, how does it meet the law? How does it fit into this? What matches that? See, they never ask, well, how will it benefit? How will it redeem? They are all wrapped up in what will I get out of it? What will happen to me? See, they're never into spill it out, risk it. They're always into protect and guard. It's a whole different style between the two. It's interesting. You find the same thing, of course, as you go down to the end of that section right there. You end up in verse 7 where Jesus says, quotes the scripture, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, which again was the same contrast. That the Pharisees were into sacrifice, that is, sacrifice in terms of sacrifice offerings, sacrifice ceremonies, sacrifice do the thing, while Jesus was into mercy and embrace and grace and forgive, and you got that whole contrast going on. It's the same thing happening in verse 9 down through verse 12, which is the second story, which of course is all about the withered hand thing, and they've gone into the synagogue, and again, it's the same thing going on. You would think at the church it might be different, but it isn't. What the grain field in the church, there was no different. Why? Because ministry is not any different here than it is out there. See, how we minister here is how we're going to minister out there. See, if you're deader than a doornail here, you're going to be deader than a doornail out there. If you're alive in Jesus here, you're going to be alive out there. See, what you're pushing in here, you're going to push out there. That's just the way it is. So it's the same everywhere. And again, their question is, in verse 10, the Pharisees, is it lawful? And again, their purpose in all of this is accusation, it says, that they might accuse him. While Jesus is saying, good night, I'm into goodness, I'm into meeting needs, in fact, when he gets done, he says, hey, goodbye to you. He goes to the crowds, and it's still on the Sabbath day, and he gets this whole multitude, and he heals them all on the Sabbath. So how many miracles did he do on the Sabbath day? Woo! He just went at it. It was great. And what did the Pharisees do in their ministry? They went over and said, well, we're going to take care of the leader of this outfit, and they plotted murder. Then you go to a scene we haven't dealt with yet, and it's in verse 22. There's a demon-possessed man. He's blind and mute, and Jesus healed him. And, of course, the multitudes just went wild by this time after all these miracles. And in verse 24, the Pharisees are saying, oh, he does this by the demons. He casts out demons by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. So, again, it's a whole different style of ministry in the contrast. But what struck me was this. While there's a contrast in ministry, and here's the Pharisees and how they want to minister and what their goals are and where they're headed in all of this. And here's Jesus in his ministry and where he wants to go and how he does it and his attitude in the whole thing. And you can see that easily. There are some phenomenal similarities between them. was kind of amazing to me, because I wouldn't compare Jesus to the Pharisees and say there's something similar between them. But hey, as you get into the chapter, there is. And involved in their ministries, there's definitely some similarities between what Jesus is and what the Pharisees are in the process of their ministry. And that's what struck me, and I got so wrapped up in this that it ended up to be tonight's presentation to you. So I want to just walk you through these. One is the idea of compulsion, that they are very similar in their compulsion. Oh, you see it easily. See, Jesus is absolutely driven. Would you agree with me that Jesus is aggressive in his ministry? Would you agree with me that he's not laid back? He's not, oh, don't think I'll do it today. He's not, well, I got a headache, I think I'll stay home. You know, he isn't into that. He's pushy. Jesus is pushy. He stomps in. He's right in the middle of things. He won't quit. He's very, very aggressive in his ministry. I mean, his very wordage is aggressive. The way he handles himself and how he draws the multitudes in, he's doing things on purpose. Jesus has some kind of a burn going on inside of him. He has some kind of a inner drive. Jesus has some kind of a passion that just won't quit. Jesus has some kind of a, you want to go up to him and say, are you on pills? I mean, the guy is just, he's hyper. Jesus is just absolutely hyper. He gets up in the morning like he knows where he's going and how he's going to get there and why he's going there. He never just, oh, well, I don't know what to do today. He just, whoa, the man is driven. You'd have to admit that, wouldn't you? It's like he's in the middle of something really big and his eyes are wide and he just, you can see it in his whole mannerism that Jesus is absolutely aggressively driven, like he's got a thumb in his back. Look at the chapter. He should have been discouraged. Do you get discouraged? He should have quit. The major force of his day, like Pharisees and the leaders of Israel, they're against him. They're plotting murder. It's getting worse and worse and worse. He should have thrown. If I'd have been there, I'd have gone off in a corner and said, well, I was just trying to help some people and nobody even cares and they didn't even spell my name right in the bulletin. I think I'll quit. But not Jesus. He just said, on you, and off he goes, gets a whole multitude of people and heals them on the Sabbath day, don't care what you think, and just marched on. You couldn't stop the man. He didn't get depressed. He didn't get disappointed. He didn't get discouraged. You couldn't dampen his spirit. You could throw a bucket of cold water on him and it'd still burn. Wow. Would you agree with me that Jesus is very, very aggressive in his ministry? Would you agree with me that the Pharisees are very, very aggressive in their ministry? Very aggressive. They just won't quit. You have to look at them and say, whoa, why don't you guys back off? No, sir, man, they just keep coming. And if they can't get through that door, they figure out another door to go through, and they figure out another door, and they get that, and then, hey, there, and they aren't going to quit. I know, and Jesus, you would think that they would get discouraged and quit. Jesus totally embarrasses them. I'm embarrassed for them. Look at verse 2. They come in verse 2, chapter 12, and say, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. And Jesus looks at him and says, oh, brother. And he gives 3 distinct stories and applications right out of the scriptures, right out of their book, and explains it to them, which is totally nails them like, you guys are off the wall. You don't know what you're talking about, even from your own scriptures. And you'd have thought they'd have gone, whoa, we'll never open our mouth again. But they don't. They go right down to the synagogue. Here they come again. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? See, they're right back at it. If you were just going to put them up here, you'd say, oh, Jesus is really stubborn. Hey, the Pharisees are really stubborn. There's something burning in Jesus that just won't let him. There's something burning in the Pharisees that just won't let them. What's burning in you? Well, preacher, I don't burn. I'm just kind of a laid-back jellyfish. Well, I recognize that you are that on some things, but there's something you burn on, I can guarantee you. If I could find your button, whoa, I bet you'd come alive. Oh, no, you're not aggressive about everything. I'm not aggressive about everything. I understand that. Who won the ball game? I don't know. Was there a ball game? Didn't know there was. So obviously I'm not aggressive about athletics. But you push my button on some things and I'm going to come up for air. So there are some things I am aggressive. Could it be that it's the characteristic of life that Jesus is aggressive in his ministry, the Pharisees are aggressive in their ministry, and you and I are aggressive in our ministry? And we do have one. Well, I'm not a minister. Yes, you are. And there's something that you're pushing, man. You're pushing something. Aggressively pushing. Won't quit. You're right down nasty about it. And if you can't get in that door, you go in this door. So could we agree that we all have an aggressive ministry of some kind? We're all hyper about something. Let me give you a second similarity, which ties right into this. Not only compulsion, but there's the idea of communication. It's interesting to me that when you are driven, when you have an inner compulsion, when something burns in your bones, when you just can't, when you are aggressive, when you're just, when you're just hyper about something, you can't keep still about it. You get mouthy. That's interesting, isn't it? You guys aren't responding very well. I don't know what the problem is here. Yeah. You get mouthy about it. And communication, you have to communicate what you're aggressive about. You can't keep still about it. You got to tell it. You burn for it, man. And when you burn for it, you got to mouth it. You can't just hide in a corner. You can't just, would you agree with me that Jesus is really mouthy, aggressively mouthy, expressive, always communicating about what he's aggressive about? I mean, again, look at the passage in chapter 12, the first story. You got this grain field thing, and the Pharisees start in, and man, Jesus jumps right up in he takes over. And according to Matthew, and in verse 3 down through verse 8, he literally just lays out a discourse that says, whoa, let me tell you how this really is. And they just stood there with their mouth open saying, whoa, and Jesus just laid it out. It was very, very strong. So he nailed them. There wasn't any doubt about that. Then when you come to verse 9, and you got the withered hand thing on the Sabbath day, and Jesus heals and he nails them again. He does it in just no theology, just a simple story about sheep, and just goes after him, and he just nails them because he's got to communicate the truth. He just has to do it. In fact, when they come and say, you're of the devil, Jesus casts out demons by Beelzebub, the ruler of the devils. Oh, good night. He goes on from verse 25 clear down to verse 37 and really got carried away. Oh, why? Because he just steamed about this. Jesus is just aggressive. And when you're aggressive, you just can't keep still about it. You got to be mouthy about it. You come up for air and you spit it out, brother. You mean Jesus got mad? No, we're not saying that, because that's the passage actually that we're supposed to be studying, which is verse 19 and 20. It says he will not quarrel nor cry out. So that there's no argument. He's not argumentative. in his presentation, but he is desperately, desperately aggressive about the proclamation of the truth. And he has to lay that out. Well, it says, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. No, that's about arrogance, not about keeping still. That's about arrogance. No, he's not standing on the street corner spitting out big words just to be heard. No, that's not what that means, and we studied that. But it's all about arrogance. No, there's no arrogance in him. It's not, I know and you don't, and I'll tell you kind of stuff. It's, oh, guys, you got to get into the truth. And he literally burns for these guys. See, it isn't that he's coming in all of his expression, which is the tone of his ministry, isn't it? But in all of the communication and expression of his ministry, it's always about, man, I gotta get the truth to you. You gotta know this. I gotta make it visible for you so you can see it and come on in and join me in what's at the core of life itself. In fact, Wednesday night we talked about Matthew 23 some, and in that passage there's the 7 woes to the Pharisees. It's really strong. But the interesting thing about, they weren't there. So it wasn't like, I'll beat the living daylights out of you guys. It wasn't that kind of thing because they weren't even there. He was trying to talk to the crowd saying, don't be like the Pharisees. And then the proof of that is you end up in that sermon on Matthew 23 he says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you guys, I would have brought you in like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. I'm not against you, I'm for you. And the reason I've said everything I've said and the reason I've been so pushy and aggressive in this is because, whoa, I care about you, man. And he lays. So see, when you burn inside, when you got this compulsion, you'll have to communicate it. Jesus did. Would you agree with me that the Pharisees can't keep their mouth shut either? I mean, you'd have thought they'd said, hey, let's go back to Jerusalem and just forget it. Hey, go do what you want to do, heal some folks and have a big time. We're going back to Jerusalem and run our church. You'd have thought they'd have just left the thing alone. But they can't. Why? Because, hey, you can't have something burning inside without communicating. And they gather around a table and they plot murder. And before they get done, they're going to demonstrate this whole thing in a communication of crucifixion. And when the word is spread around that Jesus is raised from the dead and the disciples are preaching that, you know what they do? In fact, I was reading Justin Martyr, who lived 100 years after Christ, wrote that the Pharisees and Jews were still going around the countryside proclaiming that the body of Jesus had been stolen. They did that for 100 years. They couldn't give it up. Why? Because they got this. See, when you got this thing inside of you, you just can't, you have to express it. What do you burn for? Well, I don't burn. Yes, you do. See, something's got you. See, you're hyper about something. See, something's got a thumb in your back, man. And I guarantee whatever's got its thumb in your back and my back, we have to mouth it off. We have to communicate. We got strong opinions about it, I'll tell you that. And we'll raise our voice over it. You can count on that. And I don't care what you say. I think it's this. And hey, we'll go at it. Well, I'm just laid back. No, you're not. Well, you are on some things. Yeah, I understand that. You're not aggressive about everything. I'm not aggressive about everything. But something captures you. Something masters you. And you have to be expressive about that something. Something's driving you. You don't have a choice. So would you accept this from me as truth? That it's not an issue of, are you a slave? Are you not a slave? You are a slave.
the only thing you have a choice on whose slave you're going to be. Something's going to master you. See, something's going to dominate your life. Something's going to control you, which is the next idea in the similarities. See, both Jesus and the Pharisees have this compulsion. They have a compulsion. They're both of them are aggressive. And both of them are mouthy. They communicate. They can't help themselves. They have to communicate. And both groups are control. In other words, they can't control the results of their aggressive communication. They can't control that. See, whatever it is that's in me that burns in my bones and that I'm hyper about and that I just have to mouth off about, when I mouth off, I don't have any control over what that mouthing off does and what the results of that produces in my world. That's totally out of my control. In other words, everybody has, well, the word is influence. Influence. Would you agree with me that Jesus had absolutely no control over where his ministry was going to take him? He has to heal multitudes. It burns in his bones. He has to pour his life out. He just can't help himself. He has to do this. It just, hey, the Father has to be seen. He's got to spread love. He just got to, Pharisees or no Pharisees, hey, they hate him or don't hate him. He can't control that. Jesus is burning inside, and he has to communicate that, and he's just going to keep on doing it, and he isn't going to stop. And if it takes him to a cross, so be it. He has no control over that. The Pharisees, they have no control either over the results. See, they burn in their bones. They have this, the law thing, the legalism thing. They just gotta, and they're just stuck on it, and they just can't, and they meet together in a room, and they just can't, and where that's going to take them, they're going to end up saying, crucify it. They can't help themselves. They just can't help themselves. And they have no control over that. And all of Judaism is going downhill, man. I'm telling you, Judaism in the year 70 is going to be wiped out, and the temple is going to be flat, and Judaism is going to go on. No, Jews are no longer going to be a nation. And where'd that all come from? From these guys right here. Because if they'd have bought into Jesus, everything would have been different. Jerusalem would have been saved. The temple would have been saved. Everything would have changed. But see, they burned. They got, and it came and it spilled out and it brought a crucifixion, and they have no control over the results of that. And the results are, Jerusalem's gone. What is it that burns in me that I just can't keep still about? Just has to spill out. I can't make it stop. I have no control about what that's going to do to my world. Now here's the stuff I've heard. Well, it's my personal business. No, it's not. Hey, it's my business. Why? Because it affects my family and affects my town. So what burns in you and what comes out of you affects me and my family and my kids and my grandkids and my town, man. Well, it's just no, it's not. Well, it's my own personal, no, it's not. Because you're influencing my world by what burns in you. Well, it's my personal opinion. I have a right to my personal opinion. No, you don't. What are you talking about, man? Well, it's the way I feel about it, and I have a right to feel the way I want to feel. No, you don't. Why? Because what spills out of you in those feelings and in all influences the world. And you're going to end up crucifying Christ and bringing Jerusalem down and Lebanon along with it. You can't do that because that influences me. Did that make any sense to you? So it's not just a personal thing that it doesn't hurt anybody, it's just my deal. No, because out of you, it's like throwing the stone in the middle of the pond and there are these ripples. And see, I'm in those ripples. So who you are and what burns in you and what results in you matters to me, man. And if I appear to be mad about that, I'm not. I'm really broken and concerned because, whoa, that's why I want you to be full of Jesus. So, whoa, wouldn't it be something if we could all be full of Jesus and be hyper about him and out of us, whoa, it would spill all over our town and we would have an influence for Christ that would be, because we're having an influence for something. I don't know if you'll get this or not, but let me read you a couple things. This is about influence. There was a German college student here in the States. This college student, coming from Germany, was in one of the state universities. And he was in a period of spiritual investigation, which we would call prevenient grace, and God was dealing with him. And he wrote a poem, phenomenal poem. You should get it and read it. It was called Union with Christ. And the entire poem was a cry. Oh, it was a cry to find that oneness, that intimacy. And the phrase that echoed throughout the poem was, oh, that I might find him. Oh, that I might find him. Oh, that I might find him. That was the echoing phrase throughout that poem. But he didn't find him. Won't go into the details, but no college professor, no college student wrapped their arm around him. No church loved him. No. And that kid was Karl Marx. And if you don't know who that is, he's the one that wrote the philosophy for atheistic communism. And I can see some Christians down at that college wrapping their arms around their shoulders saying, well, it's just my own personal business. And they could have influenced, if they'd have burned for Jesus, they could have influenced a young man that would have changed the course of history. Do you know what that would have meant? Let me give you another one. Sometimes study the life of Muhammad. There was a period in his life when he was developing. And if you go to the Quran and look at the mixture in the Quran between Jewish, Christian literature. I mean, you read the Quran, lots of similarities to the Bible. Lots of similarities. Isn't that interesting? That what Muhammad came up with was infiltrated by this whole Sermon on the Mount biblical message. Let me read you this paragraph. As a teen, Muhammad was eager to find truth. He spent much time on busy visits to a monastery near his home. Although he was not allowed to converse with the monks, he observed their worship very closely. He saw only form and ritual and went away empty. The whole course of history could have changed if one monk would have raised his hand and praised God. The whole course. Do you get that? Let me give you another. In the early days of the 1900s, Billy Sunday was preaching. Thousands, literally thousands, flocked to hear him. His church was packed every service. And across the street from the church where these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Christians attended on Sunday morning, there was a coffee shop. And in that coffee shop, the owner had hired a foreign student to help serve tables. His English was poor. He greatly annoyed the customers. They were consistently rude to him. They tipped poorly. So he responded with a burning hate for these Christians. And at the end of his college days, he went back to his homeland and became the tyrant Chairman Mao and locked down China. Because some Christians who went on Sunday morning had an influence in a coffee shop. Well, it's my no, it's not. Well, I can be that way if I want. No, you can't. Well, that's just the way I am. Then change. Because you're influencing my world, man. And you are aggressive about something. And you're mouthy about it. We've heard you. And you're influencing. Jesus, I got to have you. I want you to burn in my bones. I want you to master me. I want to have your mind. I want to have your heart. I want you to spill through me. I want the influence of God. Jesus, you were the visible image of the invisible Father. He burned in your bones. What drove him drove you. What he was into, you were into. He was the source of your very life. Oh, Jesus, you've got to do that in me. I don't want any influence coming out of me that's not you. I don't want anybody leaving and going and doing their thing because I somehow I influenced in the wrong direction. No, Jesus, you got burn in my bones. And I know I don't have any choice about the results of what happens out of me, but I do have a choice about whether I'm going to let you flow through me or not. I don't have any choice about the end results and who I'm going to influence. And God, I do have a choice tonight on whether I'm going to be your slave, come under your control, and you're going to burn in my bones, and you're going to master me, and you're going to be, oh, what drives me. And Lord, I've been driven by hate. I've been driven by my own self-centered desires. I've been driven by my body. I've been driven by my own selfishness. I've been driven by a lot of things, God, that have spilled influence out to my world. Please forgive me and give me another chance to be so filled with you that the influence of your presence It's bowed.
masters you, what controls you, what's the influence coming out of you? You're controlled by criticism, controlled by negative, controlled by hatred, controlled by... What are you hyper about? What do you mouth off about? You are shaping my world. Please be filled with Jesus. Oh, please be His. Please let Him fill you. Please let Him master you. Oh, please, 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 please. Please let Him be at the core of your aggressiveness. I beg you tonight, please get His mind. Please communicate nothing but Him. Please let Him be the priority of your living. Please, please. Altars open. I want to seek Him.